Jack Thompson died twice. The first time, he was 23, staring at the grill of a delivery truck that had just run a red light. One moment pavement. Screeching tires, the next blinding light, and the voice of a bored goddess who called him entertaining. She dropped him onto a floating island the size of Sicily, already populated by elves, beast-skinned merfolk, dryads, and a dozen other races who had been fighting a losing war against an ancient dragon emperor. Within 30 years, Jack had become the king. He raised mountains, carved harbors, taught crop magic that let fields bloom in a single season, and forged the nation of Eldoria. They loved him. He loved them. When the final battle came, he spent his life force sealing the dragon away forever and died smiling in the arms of his elven wife, Lyriel, with their one child watching. Then he woke up in a hospital bed on Earth, 33 years old again. No mana, no memories that anyone would believe. Just regular Jack. He did what regular Jack was supposed to do. He got a decent job in logistics, met Sarah at a friend's wedding, got married, had 2 kids, Emma 8 and Lucas 5. He told no one about the island. Some nights, he woke up reaching for a sword that wasn't there. Until the morning the sky tore open over the Pacific. The island returns. The news called it the anomaly. To the rest of the world, it was a terrifying geological impossibility, a landmass the size of Ireland that materialized 30 nautical miles off the coast of California. Satellite feeds showed snow-capped peaks, glowing bioluminescent forests, and a city of white stone and living that hadn't been there at dawn. To Jack Thompson, sitting in a suburban kitchen with a lukewarm coffee, it was simply a homecoming. The moment the island phased into this reality, a tidal wave of mana tore through his soul. The regular old Jack facade shattered instantly, his muscles long dormant, locked into the muscle memory of a 30-year war. His lungs, usually tight from city smog, expanded to draw in air that tasted of ancient pine and mountain snow. His eyes, ordinarily a dull brown, flickered with a terrifying, molten gold light. Sarah, his wife, dropped her fork. "Jack, your eyes." He couldn't answer. He was already standing, tracing the air with his hands. He felt the familiar hum of the ley lines beneath the California seabed, a frequency he had tuned 30 years ago. He was the king of Eldoria, and his kingdom was calling him home. "Pack the kids," Jack commanded, his voice dropping an octave, resonant with a power that wasn't earthly. The drive to the coast was a blur of police sirens and panic. Every time they passed a radio tower, the broadcast scrambled into Eldorian runes. By the time they reached the Santa Monica Pier, it was a riot. Military vessels were screaming toward the anomaly, their radar signatures bleeding out. Jack didn't stop at the barricades. He walked straight into the surf. As the freezing Pacific water touched his boots, he whispered a word in an ancient melodic tongue. The water didn't just part. It solidified into a shimmering bridge of light. He grabbed Emma and Lucas, one in each arm, and Sarah by the hand, dragging them into the impossible. When they stepped onto the beach of Eldoria's western harbor, the air changed. The scent of diesel and stale coffee vanished, replaced by the crushing, electric sweetness of pure magic. Lyriel was there on the dock, her silver hair catching the California sun. Beside her stood their son, Valen, now a warrior with his father's jawline. The reunion was a collision of centuries, a king of a lost world returning to his throne, his modern family standing awkwardly behind him. Within 48 hours, Jack had moved from logistics manager to global threat. He sang the island into a state of flux, creating a reactive veil. Satellites and sensors were blinded, seeing only static where the island should be. For the first 2 days, the U.S. military tried to force the issue, sending drone swarms and fighter jets, but every attempt to breach the perimeter failed. The barrier was not just a wall, but a total rejection of foreign intent. On the 3rd morning, the USS Enterprise led a final, desperate attempt to breach the perimeter. As they entered the exclusion zone, the ocean churned. A salvo of cruise missiles arced toward the island's shimmering dome. The world watched on screens as the missiles hit the barrier, not with an explosion, but with a ripple. The kinetic energy didn't detonate. It was absorbed, transmutated into pure, harmless light that washed over the barrier like a sunset. Then Jack appeared. He stood on the balcony of the King's Tower, his silhouette framed against the spires of Eldoria. He simply raised a hand. Across the entire carrier strike group, the effect was instantaneous. The advanced targeting systems on the destroyers went dark, replaced by a soft, verdant hum. Steel plating groaned as thick. Emerald vines burst from the seams of the hulls. Turrets ceased their rotation, locking into place as blooming wildflowers erupted from the barrels. Within minutes, the most powerful naval force on Earth was transformed into a floating, silent garden, anchored in the surf by massive, magical roots that had pierced the seabed. The silence from the fleet was absolute. Then, Jack's voice rolled over the water, amplified by the very atmosphere of the island. "Eldoria is closed," he declared. The sound resonated in the chests of every sailor in the fleet. "The sanctity of my land will be preserved." He didn't threaten them. He didn't destroy them. He simply rendered them obsolete. The message was clear. Earth's violence was irrelevant here. The island was a sanctuary, and it would remain untouched by the world's reach. Jack turned his back on the fleet, returning to the sanctuary of his living tower, where his children, Emma and Lucas, were already demonstrating the impossible. Despite Jack's fears about Earth genetics, his hybrid children were not null. They were vibrant with power, Emma hovering inches off the ground, and Lucas turning sand to glass with a touch. His Earthborn wife, Sarah, watched their children with a mix of awe and terror, beginning to realize that the man she married was not a logistics manager, but the king of a world that refused to be conquered. "Jack," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling as she watched them afloat toward a terrace filled with singing flowers. "What are they, and what are you?" The reunion in the king's tower was not the romantic homecoming Lyriel had imagined. Instead, it was an interrogation. Lyriel stood by the balcony, her eyes cold as polished marble, while Sarah clung to the doorway, her worldview shattered. Jack sighed, the golden glow in his eyes dimming. He sat on a throne carved from living white wood, the weight of 3 lifetimes pressing into his shoulders. "I wasn't born here, Sarah. Not the second time." He told them everything. He spoke of the delivery truck, the bored goddess, and the 30 years he spent carving a nation out of rock and sorrow. He described the final battle, the Dragon Emperor's roar, the sacrifice of his own life force to seal the beast away, and the strange, quiet void that followed. Then, the shock of waking up in an Earth hospital, 33 years old, powerless and burdened with memories of a life that felt more real than the one he was living. "I love you, Sarah," Jack said, his voice raw. "I loved our life. I didn't want to be a king again. I just wanted to be a father." "You lied for years," Sarah whispered, tears tracking through the dust on her face. "You lived a double life in your own head." Lyriel stepped forward, her voice sharp. "He lived a life of duty, mortal. You know nothing of the sacrifice a king must make." Jack held up a hand, silencing them both. "It doesn't matter now. The island is here, and the world outside is already clawing at our gates." The world's reaction had been instantaneous and violent. Once the military blockade failed, the real siege began. Millions of people, refugees, desperate scientists, religious zealots, and government agents flocked to the coast. They pressed against the shimmering dome of the barrier, banging on the air as if it were glass, begging for entry, for cures, for power. Earth had realized magic was real, and they were obsessed with consuming it. The pressure turned into a global crisis. Jack finally addressed the world, his image projected onto every screen on the planet, his voice echoing from the barrier itself. "You seek to enter Eldoria to learn the craft of the mages," Jack announced, his face impassive. "You seek to integrate, to breed, to merge your world with mine. You believe you can learn to wield the power that flows through these veins." He paused, letting the silence stretch across the globe. "You cannot. It is a biological impossibility." He explained the hard truth. Magic was not a learned skill for his people. It was encoded in their genome. Through decades of observation in Eldoria, he had learned that magic was fragile. If 2 non-magical Eldorians mated, their child could still be born with the spark. But the Earth genome was a harsh, dominant dampener. Any union between a magic wielder and an Earthling resulted in a child stripped of all magical potential. "It is a corruption," Jack stated, his tone brooking no argument. "Mixing your blood with ours will not bring you magic. It will only eradicate it from this world. I forbid all integration. I forbid entry. This is not hatred. It is preservation. You have your world, full of your own wonders and your own sicknesses. Eldoria will remain pure. The reaction was immediate. Earth didn't just want an answer. They wanted a solution, and when Jack's refusal became absolute, the resentment began to fester. Diplomatic relations dissolved into threats, and the hero who had saved his people and built this nation despite the Dragon Emperor found himself branded as the world's greatest tyrant. Jack watched the monitors from the tower. He saw the protests, the desperate attempts to bribe his people, and the growing hatred of a world denied. He looked at Emma and Lucas, who were still playing with light, oblivious of the fact that they were now the most coveted and despised children in existence. They won't stop, will they? Sarah asked, standing beside him. They won't, Jack agreed, his hand resting on the hilt of the sword he hadn't worn in years. But they don't understand one thing. What's that? I sealed the Dragon Emperor to save this world, Jack said, looking out at the barrier, where the world's desperation was beginning to manifest as a dark, encroaching storm. I sealed him so I could build something that would last. And I'll burn this entire planet to ash before I let them tear it down. The shimmering dome of the barrier didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a membrane, cool and smelling of ozone and crushed pine needles. Jack stood on the white sand, his hands clasped behind his back. Behind him, the towers of Eldoria glowed with a soft, bioluminescent hum. Before him, a sleek, black-hulled U.S. Navy destroyer sat anchored just outside the ward, its deck bristling with communication arrays. A small landing craft broke away from the destroyer, cutting through the surf. General Vance stepped out, his uniform crisp but his eyes betraying deep, exhausted lines. He looked like a man who hadn't slept since the island appeared. Jack! The general started, keeping his hands visible. Or should I call you King? The president wants to talk. We have a proposal for a permanent exchange program. We offer resources, medical supplies, and technological infrastructure. You offer us the knowledge to replicate your agriculture magic. We can solve the famine, the energy crisis. No, Jack said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the water with the weight of a decree. You aren't listening. Vance pressed, frustration leaking into his tone. The world is terrified. We're seeing mass hysteria. We need to integrate. Jack, we need to understand the biology of your people. We have top geneticists ready. Jack's eyes flickered gold. A ripple of force emanated from him, and the general's sidearm, holstered and encased in heavy cordura, spontaneously turned into a bouquet of wildflowers. The metal clips, the firing pin, the magazine, all of it transmuted into soft, fragrant stems. Vance stared at his hip, aghast. There will be no study, Jack said, his voice cold. My people are not specimens, and my children, as if on cue, his daughter Emma, 8, came running out of the tree lean. She wasn't walking. She was hovering 6 inches off the sand, her hands glowing with a soft, azure light as she chased a butterfly that looked remarkably like a miniature dragon. Lucas, 5, followed, laughing, his footsteps turning the sand to glittering glass wherever he stepped. General Vance's jaw dropped. They're human. You said Earth DNA would eradicate magic. Because it will, Jack said, his gaze hardening as he watched his children. But they are mine. They are the exception. I am a man of 2 worlds. And they will never be subjected to your needles, your labs, or your integration committees. Jack, you're building a cage. Vance shouted, his composure snapping. You call it a sanctuary, but you're just isolating them from the only future they have. The world is changing outside that bubble. Portals are opening. Monsters are tearing through. You think you can hide forever? Jack watched his children laugh. He looked at the general, then at the horizon, where the sky was beginning to bruise into an unnatural, sickly purple. I don't intend to hide, General, Jack said, turning his back on the military vessel. I intend to hold the line, but I will do it on my terms. Keep your fleets back. If one drone crosses that line, I won't turn your guns into flowers next time. I'll turn them into rust. Jack strode back toward the king's tower, his mind storming. Inside the grand hall, Sarah was waiting, a look of profound worry etched onto her face. As soon as he stepped through the archway, she rushed to him, Are you really not going to help Earth? She pleaded, her voice cracking. It's our home, Jack. People are dying out there. Jack shook his head firmly. They aren't defenseless, Sarah. America's army alone is a force to be reckoned with. They have the strength to hold their own. I will not compromise our people for their politics. Sarah looked away, her expression shifting from plea to pain. The weight of the situation was crushing, not just a global crisis, but the woman standing in the shadows of the hall. Lyriel, how are we supposed to do this? Sarah asked, her voice cold and unsure. Am I just supposed to share you, like a piece of property? Lyriel stepped out from the shadows, her presence regal and immovable. It is technically I'd asked to share Jack, she stated, her voice stern and unflinching. You came after. Jack stepped between them, his heart heavy. I'm sorry, but I love you both. You have both been very important anchors in two very different lives, and one life is merging with another. I'm not sure how or why, but we are all here. I can't choose one over the other. I ask that we try and make this work. He stepped forward and wrapped them both in a firm, desperate hug, feeling the tension radiating off them. He held them for a moment, then pulled away, looking at them one last time before turning to leave. He walked out of the hall, leaving the two women alone. Sarah stood there, confused and raw, clutching her arms as if trying to hold herself together. Lyriel remained where she was, firm and stoic, her love for Jack unshakable, anchored in the absolute belief that whatever decision he made was the right one.